Alright, so today we're going to be doing our root lab. So we're going to be learning about roots. So right here I just ripped up this little bush right here so we can look at roots. This is actually a something called a burning bush. It's actually an invasive species. I did not plant this here. So it's growing in my forest. And basically these are what we would call feeder roots. So each of these is an individual fine root. And like I said, I just ripped it up because I don't want it here. Because it's an invasive species. So you've got a pretty good sized woody root here, some smaller woody roots, and then we've got feeder roots. So this is kind of what this is a very healthy root system. Okay, so this is for the root lab, and again, this sheet is more designed for the face-to-face class, and it talks about doing sketches and you're doing that in the lab notebook. And if you want to do that, that is great. That would be fantastic if you can do that. But if you can't, don't worry about it, or you don't feel like it, because I can't accept them. So don't worry about that. But you will still be held responsible for any of the terms that are in bold. So if you see things like this, you're going to be responsible for these. So stele, epidermis, and cortex, that's kind of general for both types of roots. We're going to be looking at monocot versus eudicot root. Don't worry about the willow branch root right now. The monocot root this is the one on the right. Dicot root is over here. I'm really talking about a eudicot. When I say dicot, it's just easier to say. Right here we have this is the stele. This is the vascular cylinder. Stele is a little bit smaller in the dicot root. The epidermis is kind of the darker layer on the outside, and the cortex is the stuff basically between the vascular cylinder and the epidermis. So this darker layer here is the endodermis. Just on the inside of that there will be one cell layer, that's the pericycle, that's where the branch roots will come from, and also the vascular cambium for a woody root. These larger holes here and also here on the dicot root, that's the xylem. The lighter stuff right in here, that's going to be phloem. In the dicot root, the xylem's kind of in this cross or star shape, and kind of this green stuff right here, that's the phloem. Same thing with the monocot root. The pericycle is basically going to be one cell layer inside of the endodermis. Remember, the endodermis has the Casparian strip. That's what makes it kind of that dark color under the dye. This is the whole root. And this is basically a zoomed-in version of the stele, so just the vascular cylinder. So right here, this is the cortex. This purple probably is actually starch, because a lot of times these roots will store starch. This right here, this layer, this is the endodermis, which has got the Casparian strip. That's why it's dyed this kind of red color. The stain interacts with lignin and waxes, so it makes it this red color. The layer just on the inside, that's going to be the pericycle. That's the meristematic layer that can make branch roots, and it can also make the vascular cambium, if this will be a woody root. These green spots right here, those are phloem, and then this kind of cross part right here, this is the xylem. And basically these larger holes right here, these are all going to be vessel elements. So as long as you know all those parts, that's the eudicot root. The longitudinal root, so we have the root cap, that's of course what's going to sense gravity in the root. The zone of cell division, that's the root apical meristem. You're going to have the zone of cell elongation. The cells are going to expand in the same direction that the root's growing. That's what actually pushes the root forward through the soil. Then you have the zone of cell differentiation or maturation, same thing. This is where in most roots you will see root hairs appear. So if you look at that other video that I linked about seed germination, when you see those root hairs, that's telling you it's the zone of cell maturation or differentiation. So if I ask you that on a test, you should be looking for the root hairs. So the last thing I'm going to show you guys will be velamen roots, and I'll go through each of these bolded terms. You'll also want to look at adventitious roots. This is a separate video which is linked down here. It's also going to be linked on Moodle. And basically it's roots from a cutting. This is from pitcher plants. They're a little bit unusual in that the roots are black, and they also keep the root hairs for a really long time. So they're a really good example, easy example of root hairs. So make sure you can recognize root cap and, of course, root hairs. Okay, so we've looked at kind of some normal roots. I've showed you guys some cross-sections of normal roots that are stained, and I'm hopefully going to make a cross-section of kind of a different root. This right here is a plant. This is an orchid. Now this is a tropical orchid. This is of the genus Cattleya, also known fairly famously as corsage orchids. I actually got this from Lowe's of all places about, I don't know, about 7 years ago or something like that. And it's been blooming and doing pretty well. But the interesting thing about a lot of the tropical orchids is they have roots that are photosynthetic. If you can see here, this root, the root cap and the root tip are green. It turns white, but the interior of the root is actually still green. So it's actually photosynthetic. So it's got an extra layer of tissue on the outside. So if you look at some of these were actually broken. These are secondary roots, and you can see there's some roots coming out from the side. So I'm hopefully going to do a cross section of one of these so I can show you what it looks like. But basically these are a type of root called velamen roots. And velamen is this extra layer that they have. And it's just starting to come out when these roots are really young. So this velamen is just showing up, and basically this white stuff on the outside is extra layers of epidermis. And the reason these plants have this is in the wild, they actually grow essentially on tree trunks and tree branches. So they're epiphytes, meaning that they grow on the surface of other plants. And most tropical orchids, so if you go to the store and you want to buy an orchid as a houseplant, almost all of them are epiphytes. Some of them like a drier environment than others, and that actually makes a difference in the root. You can tell if you do a root cross-section, their roots will have, if they're native to a wetter condition, the velamen will be thinner than those that are native to a drier condition. The Cattleyas actually like fairly dry conditions, so they have a really thick velamen layer. So hopefully I'll be able to do a nice cross-section and show that to you guys. Okay, so this is the Cattleya orchid root. This is the velamen layer right along this edge. Right here, this is the exodermis, just under the velamen layer. This is the cortex in this group of orchids. These are photosynthetic, so these are green. This is the vascular cylinder. So if you look carefully, you would have the endodermis would be right here. This is the xylem. You can actually see kind of the dark spots. Those are actually vessel elements that are in the xylem. It's actually got a pith in the center, which should tell you what group of plants orchids belong to. So you'll want to know those parts. Those are all the parts that are in bold, and hopefully you know those for the test.